My husband stood on the stage and told the world I was uneducated. He held the microphone in his hand, pointed at me, and joked that I couldn't even turn on a computer without his help. He told 3,000 investors that I was simple. He smiled. The crowd laughed. He didn't know that the software he was winning an award for, the code that made him a billionaire, was actually written by me. David thinks I am his trophy wife. He thinks I am just a pretty face he can humiliate to boost his own ego. He doesn't know that I am the architect. He doesn't know that without my password, his entire empire is about to crash. Tonight, he is celebrating his success. Tomorrow, he will realize that he just insulted the only person who knows how his product works. The applause was deafening inside the grand hall. David raised the crystal trophy high above his head. Innovator of the Year. That's what the engraving said. He looked the part. Tall, charismatic, wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my father's car. He looked down at me from the podium. I was sitting at the front table, freezing in the strapless silk dress he had forced me to wear. "Smile, Clara," he had whispered in the car. "Don't say anything stupid. Just smile and look pretty. That's what you're good at." So I smiled. I clapped until my hands stung. But behind my smile, I was running the numbers. I was calculating the exact latency of his server clusters. I was mentally debugging the chaotic mess of code his team had pushed to production last night. David had no idea. To him, I was just Clara, the college dropout, the waitress he had rescued from a diner 5 years ago. He loved telling that story. It made him look like a hero. It made me look like a charity case. "I couldn't have done this alone," David said into the mic, his voice dripping with false humility. "I want to thank my team, my engineers, and of course," he paused for dramatic effect, "my lovely wife, Clara. She keeps me grounded. While I'm up late solving the complex problems of artificial intelligence, she reminds me that there is beauty in simplicity. She doesn't understand what I do, and honestly, that is a relief." Laughter rippled through the room. It wasn't mean-spirited. They thought he was being charming. But I saw the smirk on his face. It was a power move. He was reminding me of my place. He was reminding me that he held the purse strings, the status, and the intellect. He was the genius, I was the pet. I felt a tear prick the corner of my eye. Not from sadness, from rage. Pure, cold rage. I took a sip of water to hide my shaking hands. "You didn't solve the complex problems, David," I thought. "You were asleep." I remembered 3 nights ago, he was crying on the bathroom floor. Panic attack. The system was crashing. The investors were threatening to pull out. "I can't fix it," he had sobbed. "I don't know what's wrong." I had comforted him. I had put him to bed. And then I had gone to his study. I logged in as admin. I spent 6 hours rewriting the kernel. I fixed the memory leak. I saved the company. And in the morning, I logged out and went back to making pancakes. When he woke up and saw the system running perfectly, he didn't ask how. He just assumed his genius had manifested in his sleep. Or maybe he knew and was too terrified to admit it. The ceremony ended. The after-party began. Waiters circulated with champagne trays. Men in expensive suits surrounded David, patting him on the back. I stood by the window, watching the city lights of Manhattan. I felt invisible. "Clara, darling, get me a scotch!" David's voice snapped me back. He wasn't asking, he was ordering. He was talking to a group of potential partners. "This is my wife," he introduced me without looking at me. "She's great with domestic things. Terrible with technology, though. I tried to teach her how to use the smart home system, and she nearly flooded the basement." The men laughed. "Women in tech, right?" one of them joked. I felt my blood boiling. I walked to the bar. I ordered his scotch. Single malt, neat. I walked back and handed it to him. "Here you go, darling," I said softly. "Thanks," he grunted, turning his back on me. I looked at his phone sitting on the table. It was unlocked. He was so arrogant. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was too simple to understand what a root directory was. I wasn't going to make a scene. Not here. Screaming would only prove him right that I was emotional and unstable. No, I was going to beat him at his own game. I was going to use the one thing he underestimated, my mind. The ride home was silent. The limousine cut through the dark streets. David loosened his tie, the charm fading instantly. He looked exhausted and annoyed. "You looked stiff tonight," he criticized, checking his stock portfolio on his tablet. "I told you to work on your posture. You're representing a billion-dollar brand, Clara. Try to look the part." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I was just proud of you." "Proud?" he scoffed. "You don't even know what I won the award for. If I asked you to explain Neuralink, you'd probably say it connects to the toaster." I turned my head to the window so he wouldn't see my eyes. Neuralink is a predictive algorithm based on a polymorphic node structure, I recited in my head. I wrote the base code in C++ because Python was too slow for the data intake. "We're celebrating tonight," David announced as the car pulled into the driveway of our glass mansion. "I invited the board over for drinks tomorrow. Make sure the house is spotless. And Clara, don't talk business, just serve the drinks." "Okay, David," I said. We walked inside. The house was cold, modern, empty. David went straight to his office. "I have to check the servers," he said. "Don't wait up." I watched his office door close. I heard the lock click. I walked to the bedroom. I took off the dress. I took off the earrings. I stood in front of the mirror and wiped off the makeup. The trophy wife stared back at me. But beneath the surface, the hacker was waking up. I waited until 2 a.m. I waited until the house was silent. Then, I walked into my walk-in closet. I pushed aside the rows of designer coats. Behind the winter collection, there was a small safe. David thought it held my jewelry. 1, 2, 3, 5. The Fibonacci sequence. The safe beeped open. Inside, there was no jewelry, just a laptop, a matte black machine with no logos. My machine. I sat on the floor of the closet. I opened the lid. The screen glowed blue. "Welcome back, architect," the terminal read. I cracked my knuckles. David wanted me to be uneducated? Fine. I would give him a lesson he would never forget. I typed in a command. I accessed the company's main repository. I didn't hack in. I didn't need to. I had built the door. I looked at the code David was so proud of. It was running smoothly because of my patch from 3 days ago. "Let's see how well you run without me," I whispered. I didn't delete the code. That would be too obvious. Instead, I wrote a script, a time bomb. In 24 hours, right during his meeting with the board, the system wouldn't crash. It would revert. It would revert to the version before I fixed it. The version that didn't work. When it failed, and the error logs popped up on the screen, they wouldn't show an error code. They would show a message. I typed the message into the command line. "Error Y is UCCO not found. Please contact administrator, Clara." I hit enter. The script uploaded. I closed the laptop. I put it back in the safe. I stood up and walked back to bed. David was sleeping soundly, dreaming of his billions. I lay down beside him and closed my eyes. "Good night, darling," I whispered. "Enjoy your award. It's the last one you'll ever get." David is about to have the worst meeting of his life. If you want to see exactly how Clara destroys his ego in front of the entire board, hit that like button and subscribe right now. The morning sun sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our dining room, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. But inside the house, the atmosphere was freezing. David was sitting at the head of the marble table reading the Wall Street Journal. His face was plastered on the front page. The headline read, "The Visionary, How David Thorne Solved the AI Latency Crisis." He took a sip of his black coffee, smiling at his own reflection in the paper. He looked like a king sitting on his throne. I was standing in the kitchen, buttering toast, feeling like the ghost haunting his castle. "Make sure the coffee is hot when the board members arrive," David said without looking up. He flipped the page, the sound sharp and dismissive in the quiet room. "And Clara?" "Try not to hover. Pour the water, serve the pastries, and then disappear. We have serious business to discuss. I don't want you distracting them with small talk." "I understand," I said softly. My voice was calm, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He didn't know that the visionary on the front page was currently running on borrowed time. He didn't know that the code holding his platform together was ticking down, 10 hours remaining. By noon, the driveway was filled with black SUVs. The board of directors had arrived. These were the men who controlled the money. Mr. Henderson, the lead investor, walked in first. He was a shark in a three-piece suit, a man who could smell weakness from a mile away. He shook David's hand firmly. "Impressive numbers yesterday, David," Henderson grumbled, his voice like gravel. "The stock is rallying, but we need to see the stability report. The Asian markets are worried about the server load." "Not to worry," David beamed, guiding them into his home office, a massive room lined with mahogany bookshelves that contained books he had never read. "The new patch I deployed is bulletproof, zero latency, infinite scalability. It's my masterpiece." I followed them in, carrying a silver tray with a crystal water pitcher. I felt invisible. They talked over me as if I were a piece of furniture. I moved around the table, filling their glasses. David sat at the head of the conference table, connecting his laptop to the massive 85-inch screen mounted on the wall. "Gentlemen," David began, leaning back in his leather chair, "what you are about to see will change the industry. I have eliminated the processing bottleneck." He clicked a button. The screen came alive. Graphs and charts filled the display, all showing green arrows pointing up. The board members nodded in approval. I stood in the corner, clutching the empty silver tray against my chest. My eyes were fixed on the digital clock in the corner of his screen. 11:59 a.m. "As you can see," David continued, his voice swelling with arrogance, "I have optimized the kernel architecture. It runs on a self-sustaining loop. It requires zero maintenance." The timestamp changed. The time bomb I had planted last night activated. On the screen, the green graphs suddenly froze. The fluid animation of the data stream stuttered, then stopped completely. A jagged line of static tore across the display. "Just a moment," David said, his smile faltering slightly. "Minor glitch. High-resolution rendering." He tapped the refresh key aggressively. The screen didn't refresh. Instead, the white background turned a deep, ominous red. The beautiful charts vanished. In their place, a single terminal window popped up. Black text on a red background, magnified to 8K resolution, so every pixel was sharp enough to cut. "Critical system fail. Carol panic code, reverting to legacy version. A your for architect not found." The room went deathly silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, his eyes narrowing behind his spectacles. "David, what is this?" David was sweating now. I could see the beads forming on his forehead, glistening under the track lights. I don't know, it's impossible. I fixed this. I wrote the patch myself." He was typing frantically now, his fingers slamming against the keys. "Override," he muttered. "Command, override." But the system didn't respond to him, because he wasn't the administrator. Then the final message appeared, the one I had typed with a smile on my face at 2 a.m. It blinked slowly, mocking him. "Access denied. User CEO does not have permission to restore system. Please contact administrator. Clara." Mr. Henderson read the text out loud. His voice was confused, bordering on angry. "Please contact administrator Clara." He slowly turned his head. 5 other men turned with him. All eyes landed on me. I was standing by the door, the silver tray still in my hand. I looked at the screen, then I looked at David. His face had drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogance was gone. The visionary was gone. All that was left was a fraud who didn't know the password to his own life. "Clara," David whispered, his voice cracking. What did you do?" I didn't answer immediately. I walked over to the table, I placed the silver tray down with a deliberate, heavy clatter that made them all jump. I poured myself a glass of water, took a slow sip, and looked David dead in the eye. "I didn't do anything, David," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I'm just the uneducated wife, remember? I don't understand technology. I just keep the house warm." "Fix it," he hissed, panic rising in his throat. "Whatever you did, fix it now. We are losing millions by the second." "And I can't fix it," I lied smoothly. "I'm simple. I struggle with the microwave." Mr. Henderson stood up. He wasn't looking at David anymore. He was looking at me with a newfound intensity. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, his tone respectful for the first time, "does that screen say you are the administrator?" "It appears so," I said, glancing at the chaos on the monitor. "It seems the system recognizes the person who actually wrote the code, not the person who took credit for it." David slammed his fist on the table. "She's lying! She's crazy! She must have hired a hacker!" "Check the commit logs, Mr. Henderson," I said calmly. "Check the IP address of every major update for the last 3 years. It doesn't come from his office. It comes from the guest Wi-Fi."
My Wi-Fi.
Henderson pulled out his phone. He called the CTO. He put it on speaker. "Trace the source code author," he barked. A moment later, the voice on the other end crackled through. "Sir, the digital signature on the kernel isn't David's. It's encrypted, but the encryption key is, well, it's the wife's birthday." The silence that followed was heavier than the first. David slumped in his chair, defeated. He looked small. He looked pathetic. "So," I said, picking up the pitcher of water, "it seems we have a problem. The company is currently running on a broken version of the software. The stock is probably plummeting as we speak, and the only person who has the encryption key to fix it is the woman you told to disappear." I turned to walk out of the room. "Wait," David screamed, scrambling out of his chair. He fell to his knees. Literally. He grabbed the hem of my skirt. "Clara, please, don't leave. I'll give you anything. Half the company. Anything." I looked down at him. The man who had mocked me. The man who had used me. "I don't want half, David," I whispered so only he could hear. "I want to watch it burn." I pulled my skirt free from his grip and walked out of the office. I didn't stop. I walked straight to the front door. Behind me, I could hear the shouting of the board members, the ringing of phones, and the sound of an empire collapsing. I stepped out into the fresh air. The sun was still shining. It was a beautiful day for a divorce. David thought cutting off my bank account would break me. He forgot that before I was a billionaire's wife, I was a survivor. I walked down the winding driveway of the glass mansion, the gravel crunching under my heels with every step. I expected to feel free. I expected the air to taste sweeter now that I had walked away from the man who treated me like a servant. But as I reached the main road, my phone buzzed in my hand. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from my bank app. Alert: joint account frozen due to suspicious activity reported by primary holder. I stopped walking. The cold wind whipped my hair across my face. I tried to open the app, but a red padlock icon appeared on the screen. Access denied. David wasn't just letting me go. He was cutting off my lifeline. He knew I had no cash. He knew I had nowhere to go. He was trying to starve me into coming back. I hailed a taxi that was passing by. I told the driver to take me to the train station. I needed to get out of the city, maybe go back to my parents' old house in Jersey. But when I swiped my personal credit card, the one I thought was safe, the machine beeped an angry, high-pitched tone. "Card declined, lady." The driver said, looking at me in the rearview mirror with suspicion. "It says stolen card." "It's not stolen," I said, my voice rising in panic. "It's my card. My name is on it." "Look, I don't want trouble," the driver said, pulling over to the curb. "Get out." I stood on the sidewalk as the taxi sped away, splashing dirty puddle water onto my silk dress. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from David. Just 3 words. "War it is." I looked around. The city suddenly felt dangerous. I was the wife of a billionaire, wearing $10,000 worth of clothes, but I couldn't buy a bottle of water. I realized then that David wasn't scared anymore. The shock of the board meeting had worn off, and his narcissism had kicked back in. He had realized something important. He controlled the narrative. He controlled the money. And most importantly, he controlled the media. I walked 3 miles to a small coffee shop in a crowded part of town. I needed to think. I ordered a black coffee and paid with the crumpled $20 bill I found in my coat pocket, the only real money I had left. On the wall, a flat-screen TV was playing the midday news. Breaking news, the anchor announced. My stomach dropped. David's face filled the screen. He was standing outside the police precinct, surrounded by microphones. He looked devastated. He was a good actor. My wife Clara has suffered a severe mental breakdown, David told the cameras, wiping a fake tear from his eye. She has been under a lot of stress. In her confusion, she has accessed our company's servers and planted a malicious virus. She is delusional. She thinks she wrote the code. We are worried for her safety. If anyone sees her, please contact the authorities immediately. She is not herself. The coffee shop went quiet. A woman at the next table looked up at the TV, then looked at me. She squinted, recognizing the dress, the hair. I pulled my coat collar up and ran out the back door. He had flipped the script. He had turned me from the victim into the villain. Malicious virus, mental breakdown. It was brilliant. If I went to the police now to claim ownership of the code, they would just see a crazy woman who sabotaged a billion-dollar company. They would lock me up in a psych ward before I could ever type a password. I kept running. My heels were blistering my feet, so I took them off and ran barefoot on the cold pavement. I needed to disappear. But how do you disappear when your husband owns the biggest AI tracking company in the world? I looked at my phone. It was still on. The GPS was active. David's software, my software, was running in the background. Neuralink location services. I had written that code to help parents find lost children. Now David was using it to hunt his runaway wife. I stopped by a storm drain. I looked at the device that connected me to the world. It was a beacon. I couldn't keep it. I smashed the screen against the concrete railing, shattering the glass. Then I dropped it into the dark water below. Silent. I was now offline. No money, no ID, no phone, and the entire city was looking for the crazy wife of the year's biggest innovator. I found a public library 2 blocks away. It was warm inside. I went to the public computers in the back, pulling my hood over my head. I didn't log in. I just stared at the screen. I needed a plan. David thought he had checkmated me. He thought that by taking my money and my reputation, he had stripped me of my power. But he forgot one thing. He forgot where I came from. He met me when I was a waitress working double shifts. He met me when I knew how to survive on ramen noodles and sleep in my car. He thought I was a pampered princess who would come crawling back to the castle the moment it got cold. He didn't know that the uneducated girl knew how to fight in the mud. I opened the terminal on the library computer. I couldn't hack Neuralink from here. The firewalls were too strong for a public connection. But I didn't need to hack the company. I needed to hack the man. I started searching for David Thorne offshore holdings. I searched for the shell companies he used to hide his assets. I knew they existed because I had seen the files once, years ago. If I couldn't beat him in the boardroom, I would beat him in the dark. I typed in a query. It was a long shot. I looked for a digital footprint of his old fixer shady lawyer named Marcus Brave. David used him for the dirty work. If David was framing me, Marcus was the one planting the evidence. I found an address. A warehouse in the industrial district. It was getting dark. I had no money for a bus. I started walking. David wanted a war. He was going to get one. He had taken my credit cards, but he hadn't taken my memory. And I remembered where the bodies were buried. Clara is going off the grid to hunt down the man who ruined her life, but is walking into a fixer's warehouse a trap. Hit like and subscribe for part 4 to see Clara turn the tables, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if the whole world thought you were the villain? They branded me a fugitive, a danger to society, but the only thing I ever stole was the truth. The industrial district was a graveyard of rusted steel and abandoned hopes. Thick fog rolled in off the river, smelling of heavy oil, wrapping around the decaying factories like a suffocating shroud. I walked through the deep shadows, keeping my head low. Every time a police cruiser swept past, its sirens wailing in the distance, my heart hammered against my ribs. I was the villain now, the unstable woman who had supposedly attacked an American hero. My feet were bleeding inside my expensive heels, so I had kicked them off miles back. Now I walked barefoot on the freezing, wet pavement. I didn't feel the pain. I only felt the rage. I finally reached the address I had memorized from the library terminal 404 River Road. It was a nondescript warehouse with blacked-out windows that swallowed the light. A small, unassuming sign on the door read, "Brave Consulting." This was where Marcus Brave, David's fixer, operated. This was where the bodies were buried, metaphorically, and perhaps literally. I approached the side metal door. It was secured with an electronic keypad lock, a generic model, gray and weathered. I didn't have hacking tools. I didn't have a computer. But I had something they always underestimated: my eyes. I knelt down, squinting at the rubber buttons. The numbers 1, 9, 8, and 4 were slightly more worn than the rest, the oil from human fingers having smoothed them down over years of use. 1984. The year George Orwell wrote about a surveillance state. It was exactly the kind of arrogant, ironic code David and Marcus would choose. I punched in the numbers 1984. The small LCD screen flashed green. Message match. The lock clicked heavily. I slipped inside, closing the heavy metal door behind me to shut out the fog. The warehouse was freezing, colder than the outside. Rows of server racks hummed in the darkness, their blue LED lights blinking like thousands of unblinking eyes watching me from the dark. This wasn't just an office, it was a data farm. I moved silently across the concrete floor toward the glass-walled office in the center. There was a single computer terminal on the desk. I sat down, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. If I triggered an alarm, the police would be swarming this place in 3 minutes. I had to be perfect. I bypassed the login screen using a backdoor exploit I had discovered years ago in the Windows kernel. A vulnerability I never told David about because I knew he would use it to spy on the innocent. I was in. I started searching. I typed in Clara. Nothing. Thaidas searched for wife. Nothing. Then I remembered David's nickname for me when he was angry, when he wanted to make me feel small. Project Simple. I typed it in, a folder appeared. I opened it, and my blood turned to ice. It wasn't just a few documents. It was years of surveillance. There were audio recordings from bugs planted in my car, keylogger reports from my laptop, high-resolution photos of me meeting with my parents. But the most damning file was a video dated 2 years ago. I clicked play. The screen showed David and Marcus sitting in this very office. David was drinking scotch, looking relaxed, the master of his universe. "She's writing code I don't understand, Marcus," David said on the recording. "The new neural net, it's beyond anything my team can do. If she ever leaves me, she takes the company with her. I can't let that happen." "So what's the plan?" Marcus asked, his voice like gravel. "We build a case," David replied, a cold smile touching his lips. "We start planting evidence of mental instability. We doctor her medical records. We make her look paranoid. So when the time comes, if she tries to claim ownership, we can just say she's crazy. Who will the world believe? The billionaire genius or the uneducated housewife?" I sat there in the dark, tears streaming down my face. He hadn't just stolen my work. He had premeditated my destruction. He had been gaslighting me for years, waiting for the precise moment to pull the trigger. Suddenly, headlights swept across the high windows of the warehouse, cutting through the gloom. Tires screeched on the gravel outside. A car door slammed. "I know she's here," a voice shouted. It was Marcus. The silent alarm tripped on the server. "Find her!" another voice yelled. It was David. Panic surged through me like electricity. I grabbed a USB drive from the desk and frantically started copying the Project Simple folder. The progress bar crawled across the screen, agonizingly slow. Copying, 40%. Footsteps echoed on the concrete floor, heavy and fast. They were coming toward the glass office. 60%. Yeah, check the office. Marcus yelled. 80%. I looked around for a weapon. There was nothing but a heavy metal stapler. 99%.
There she is!
The door to the office burst open just as the computer beeped complete. I yanked the USB drive out, shoved it into my bra, and dove under the desk just as a bullet shattered the computer monitor above my head. Glass rained down on me. "Don't kill her, you idiot!" David screamed. "We need the encryption key." I crawled on my hands and knees toward the back exit of the office. Glass crunched under my hands, cutting my skin. I scrambled into the shadows of the towering server racks, the blue lights flickering over me. "Clara." David's voice echoed through the vast warehouse, distorted and menacing. "Come out, darling. We can talk about this. You're tired. You're confused. Let me help you." I held my breath. He was 10 feet away. I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp, acrid scent of gunpowder. I spotted a fire alarm on the wall near the rear exit. It was my only chance. I picked up a heavy hard drive from a shelf and hurled it across the room with all my strength. It smashed into a pile of metal pipes with a loud, ringing clang. "Over there," Marcus shouted, running toward the noise. David turned, distracted. In that split second, I bolted. I slammed my hand against the fire alarm bar. The klaxon began to wail, a deafening, ear-piercing scream that filled the space. The sprinklers overhead exploded, drenching the entire warehouse in a curtain of water. "Stop her." I burst out the back door into the alleyway. I didn't look back. I ran through the pouring rain, slipping on the mud, clutching the USB drive against my chest like it was my beating heart. I had the proof. I had the weapon. But I was alone in the dark. David thinks he's written the ending to my story. He thinks he can erase me. But he forgot one thing. I wrote the code, and I'm about to crash his entire system. If you want to see how I take down a billionaire empire with nothing but a USB drive, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. The war has just begun. David was watching from his glass tower. He didn't know I was about to throw a rock through his window, live on national television. I ran until my lungs burned. The rain washed away the tears on my face, but it couldn't wash away the fear. I was clutching the USB drive so hard my knuckles were white. This tiny piece of plastic held my freedom. It held the recordings of David plotting to destroy me. But evidence is useless if you're dead. And right now, with every police siren getting closer, death felt like a very real possibility. I ducked into a subway station, blending into the late-night crowd. I needed a way to get this information out. I couldn't go to the police. David had them in his pocket. I couldn't go to the bank. I couldn't go home. I needed a microphone. I needed an audience. I remembered a name. Elias Vane. He was a tech journalist who had been investigating David for years. David had sued him into bankruptcy last year for libel, but Elias had never stopped digging. He was the only person in this city who hated David as much as I did. I used a payphone, relic from another era, and dialed the number I remembered from his old blog. "Who is this?" A groggy voice answered. "It's Clara Thorne," I whispered, pressing the phone to my ear to block out the subway noise. "I have the proof, Elias. I have everything. Project Simple, the surveillance, the code theft. I have it all." There was a long silence. "Where are you?" "West 4th Street Station." "I'm coming to you." "Don't," he said sharply. "They are watching my apartment. David's security team has been parked outside for weeks. If you come here, they'll grab you. The GNN broadcast tower, Elias said, I have a friend in the control room. He owes me a favor. If we can get you into the studio during the morning news, we can air it live before they can cut the feed. The morning news starts in 4 hours, I said, checking the clock on the wall. Get there, Elias said. And Clara, don't let them catch you. If they get that drive, you disappear. The next 4 hours were a blur of shadows and paranoia. I moved through the city like a ghost. I stole a hoodie from a laundromat to cover my face. I rode in the back of a delivery truck to bypass the police roadblock set up in Midtown. David wasn't taking any chances. His face was on every digital billboard.
Missing? Have you seen this woman? Mentally unstable. Dangerous.
He was painting me as a monster to ensure that if anyone saw me, they wouldn't help me, they would fear me. I reached the GNN building at 5 a.m. It was a fortress of glass and steel. Security guards patrolled the lobby. I couldn't just walk in. I circled around to the loading dock. A catering van was unloading donuts for the morning crew. I waited until the driver was distracted, signing a clipboard, and I slipped inside the open cargo doors. I hid behind a stack of crates, holding my breath as the van drove into the underground garage.
All inside.
I crept through the hallways, following the signs for Studio One. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I looked like a wreck mud on my legs, hair matted with rain, wearing a stolen, oversized hoodie. I didn't look like a CEO. I looked exactly like the crazy woman David described. I reached the studio doors. The ON Air sign was dark. They were prepping for the 6:00 a.m. broadcast. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around, ready to fight. It was a man in a headset. He looked terrified. Clara, he whispered. I'm Mike. Elias sent me. I almost collapsed with relief. I have the drive, I said, pulling it out. Okay, listen fast. Mike said, dragging me into a makeup room. We go live in 10 minutes. The anchor, Sarah, knows you're coming. She's agreed to interview you. But David knows too. His security team just pulled up outside. They are coming up the elevators right now. We have maybe 5 minutes before they breach the floor. I can't go out there like this, I said, looking at my reflection in the mirror. I look insane. No one will believe me. Mike grabbed a towel and started wiping the mud off my face. You don't need to look perfect, Clara. You just need to look real. That's your power. David is polished. You are raw. Let the world see what he did to you. The door to the studio opened. The lights were blindingly bright. The cameras were massive, robotic eyes staring at the center stage. 3 minutes to air, the director shouted. I walked onto the set. The anchor, Sarah, nodded at me. She looked nervous. She knew she was risking her career for this. I sat in the chair opposite her. Mike ran to the control booth and plugged in my USB drive.
2 minutes.
The elevator doors down the hall dinged. I heard shouting. Mrs. Thorne, stop right there. It was the voice of David's head of security. Lock the studio doors. Mike yelled over the intercom. The heavy soundproof doors slammed shut just as the security guards reached them. We could hear them pounding on the glass, muffled and angry. They couldn't get in without breaking the sound seal.
1 minute.
I looked at the camera lens. I imagined David sitting at home, watching this feed, thinking he had won. Thinking he had silenced me.
30 seconds.
The pounding on the door got louder. They were using a battering ram. The glass was cracking, spiderwebs of white, fracturing the view of the angry men outside. 15 seconds. I took a deep breath. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the only other thing I had kept, my wedding ring. I placed it on the glass table in front of me. It spun for a second before settling. 5, 4, 3. The red light on the camera turned on. Good morning, Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. We have a breaking story, a story that billionaire David Thorne tried to kill. Joining me live is the real architect of Neuralink, Clara Thorne. I looked straight into the lens, into the homes of millions of people, into David's eyes. "Hello, David," I said. "Let's talk about the code." Clara just went live and David can't stop the signal. If you want to see the aftermath and David's empire crumble in real time, hit that subscribe button. The truth is out. They told the world I was crazy, but they forgot one thing. I wrote the code that runs their lives. The red on-air light glowed like a burning eye. I looked straight into the camera lens, ignoring the sound of the security guards pounding on the studio door behind me. The glass was beginning to spiderweb. I had seconds, maybe a minute, before they broke in and cut the feed. "My name is Clara Thorne," I said, my voice steady and clear, broadcasting to millions of homes across the country. "And for the last 5 years, I have been the ghost behind the machine. My husband David told you I was uneducated. He told you I was mentally unstable, but he didn't tell you that every line of code in the Neuralink system was written by me." The anchor, Sarah, looked at me with wide eyes. "Mrs. Thorne, those are serious allegations. Do you have proof?" "Better than proof," I said, reaching for the laptop Mike had set up on the table. "I have control." I typed in a command. "Right now, David is watching this from his office. He thinks he can stop me. But he can't stop the architect." I hit enter. Instantly, the massive screens behind the news desk changed. The standard GNN logo vanished. In its place, a stream of documents appeared. It was the Project Simple folder. "These are audio recordings of David conspiring to frame me," I explained as the audio played over the airwaves. David's voice filled the studio and millions of living rooms. "If she leaves, I'm finished. We need to make her look crazy." The pounding on the studio door stopped abruptly. The security guards outside had heard it. They knew it was over. They weren't going to break down the door to protect a man who had just confessed to a crime on live TV. I continued, typing another command. "And this," I said, "is the source code. Look at the timestamps." Every major update was committed from my personal laptop hours after David went to sleep. Then I did the final move. The checkmate. "David," I said to the camera, "you said I couldn't turn on a microwave. Watch this." I accessed the Neuralink master control. I initiated a remote shutdown of the entire global network. "If I am not the creator," I challenged, "then surely the great David Thorne can turn it back on. I'm giving him 5 minutes." The screen went black. The Neuralink app on millions of phones stopped working. The world paused. We waited. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. The news anchor touched her earpiece. "We are getting reports. David Thorne is currently barricaded in his office. He is not responding to calls." 3 minutes. 5 minutes passed. The system remained dead. "He can't fix it," I said softly. "Because he doesn't know how." I typed one final line, "Restore system. Athoth, Clara." Instantly, the screens lit up green. The network came back online. "That," I said, standing up as the studio doors finally opened, "not by security guards, but by the NYPD, is my resignation." The police officers walked past me. They weren't there to arrest me. They were there to escort me out of the building safely. As I walked out into the morning sunlight, I saw the breaking news alert on the Times Square billboard. "Billionaire CEO arrested. Wife expose fraud of the century." 3 months later, I stood in the center of the Neuralink headquarters. The sign on the building had been changed. It now simply read, "Architect Systems." I walked into the CEO's office. It was no longer cold and intimidating. I had filled it with plants, with light, with life. I sat down at the desk. Mr. Henderson walked in, holding a familiar object. It was the Crystal Innovator of the Year trophy, the one David had held up that night. "The board voted," Henderson said, placing it on my desk. "They want you to have this. For real this time." I looked at the trophy. I remembered the way David's hand had gripped my waist. I remembered the laughter of the crowd. "No," I said, smiling. "I don't need a trophy to know who I am." I picked it up and handed it back to him. "Melt it down. We can use the crystal for the new server cooling system. It's time to build something useful." I turned my chair to look out the window. Somewhere in a federal prison cell, David was probably watching the news on a small, grainy TV. He was finally living the simple life he had always mocked me for. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue. "Hello, architect," the prompt read. "Hello, world," I typed back. I was Clara. I was uneducated. And I was the woman who built the future. If you loved this story of how a genius underdog took down a narcissist, smash that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And let me know in the comments, what was your favorite part, the time bomb or the live TV takeover? Subscribe and turn on notifications because our next story is about a janitor who secretly solved